Hey guys, I just wanted to take a second and give you guys some help on finding surface area for cylinders. So before I get started, I just want to tie into a couple of things. And the first thing that I want to tie into is reviewing a couple of these terms or names. So we're going to start off with the red line, and I'm hoping you guys, when you look at this shape, can see this red line, and we can call that a diameter. And it's really just important to make sure we know these words. That's why I'm just taking a minute to kind of review. This one here, we're going to call a radius. The radius starts in the center and goes to the outer edge. And the last one is that black line that actually surrounds, and this is called our circumference. Okay, so it's just really important for us to remember these words and kind of know when I say diameter, I'm talking about the line from one edge to the other of the circle, circumference, the distance around the circle, and radius from the middle out. So let's go into actually solving, finding the surface area for a cylinder. Surface area for a cylinder. So this is not a super hard concept, but many people struggle with it because it involves kind of having a couple different understandings. We use letters to kind of interchange depending upon what we're looking at. And I just want to talk very briefly about that. So cylinders obviously can be sitting upright like this, or cylinders can be sitting like a pipe in the ground, or like a culvert. Something like that, they can be sitting like that. And when we're looking at them up and down like this one, we would usually think of this as being a height of my cylinder. And it's important to have that understanding that really that height is basically a separation between the circles. Same thing here, we wouldn't look at the height, we would actually look at this as being a length of piping. So really these are interchangeable, these are the same. So whether I'm asking a question about the height of a cylinder, or if I'm asking you for the length of the prism, that kind of thing, both of those terms, I could look at height or I could look at length as being my orientation of the cylinder. So is it upright with the circles opening to the top and bottom, or is it laying on its side where the circles are the left and right? So it's just a matter of interpreting what we're looking at. So going on then, with that idea in place, I'm going to actually draw a picture, and I'm going to pretend that we're kind of looking at a can of soup. So a can of soup sitting here. And a can of soup generally has a distance here, about, we'll make it up here, we'll call this 7 centimeters, and we'll say this can of soup is 13 centimeters high. So there's the information that I gave you, and now what I want to know is, and that question would be, calculate the surface area. And I'm going to abbreviate SA for surface area. So in this circumstance, when I'm starting this, I usually refer to you guys, or at least the easiest way to look at it to understand what we're doing. Surface area basically is adding all the pieces of a prism together. In this case, it's our cylinder as our prism. So I'm adding all the pieces together. Sometimes it's easier to look at this as a net and to turn around and figure out what shapes are making this up, so it's easy enough for us to see the pieces. I usually look at this curved area, the curved part, the label part of my soup, and I imagine that if I cut that piece of paper and unwound it, it would actually look like a rectangle, something like that. I'm not sure why it's disappearing. Something like that. I know that this net also has a circle for the top and a circle for the bottom. Those circles are supposed to be the same size because a can of soup, the top and the bottom of the can are about the same size, or should be the same size. I know in this example, we have this distance here being 7 centimeters. The other piece of information we had from this example that I had was this piece here is 13 centimeters. And I know the scale is not so good, but that's okay. So looking at this and having this basic idea in terms of what my net of this soup can is looking at, I want to find the surface area, and to do that, I need to know a couple key things. Number one, I need to know how to find the area of a circle, which you guys did. We did that on Pi Day. We actually figured out that the area of a circle is pi r squared. So we know that. So a couple of things that I want to tie into before is I have to look at this 7 and decide, is it a radius or is it a diameter? And we should know that it's a diameter. And we need to understand my radius would be connected by simply looking at my diameter and dividing it by 2. So I can look at that scenario. So I can actually find my radius to be 7 divided by 2, and I can say my radius for this shape is going to be 3.5 centimeters. So I found two important pieces of information. I now know my radius and I now know my diameter, which was given. So looking at that, when I'm looking at this shape, I can say, well, that's a circle. To find the area, I'm going to memorize that formula, A equals pi r squared. And I really want to emphasize this to everybody. This is exactly the same as saying pi times r times r. That's not 2 times r, that's radius times radius. So that's 3.5 times 3.5. So I can't just double it like we sometimes want to. So now I can turn around and find the area of that circle. Easy enough. The area of that circle is going to be pi, which I know, 3.14, times my radius. My radius is 3.5, and I'm going to square that radius because it's radius squared. And when I do that, plug those numbers in my calculator, I get a number 38.465. And that's centimeters squared because that's an area. So I now know the area of that circle. Now, we also talked just a second ago when we said this other circle at the bottom, this circle here, is exactly the same as that top circle. I can show you those calculations, like, right, we know that this is 7 centimeters, and therefore it's supposed to be the same. So I could do all of that all over again. I could say A equals pi r squared, 3.14 times 3.5 squared, and I could get 38.465 centimeters squared again. Or I could have just multiplied that 38.465 by 2. But since I have a net up, I just wanted you guys to see the pieces. So I have all the pieces. So now all I need to do is I need to figure out the area for this rectangle. And we know how to solve the area of a rectangle. We know the area of a rectangle. I'm just going to do it in a different color here. Go back to red here. I'm going to say the area for a rectangle is simply length times width. Well, if I'm looking at this rectangle, this looks like it's a length to me, and this looks like it's the width. Well, the problem is I don't have a number anywhere for that, and I know 7 is too small. I do know, however, that this distance is exactly the same as that distance. These guys are the same. So if I know that, I can actually do some calculations. I can turn around and say, well, wait a second. That red line that I just drew around the circle, that's known as my circumference. So I could actually find my circumference, and I could say, well, circumference. And we learned a formula for circumference. Circumference is pi times diameter. Well, I know what my diameter is, and I know pi is 3.14, so I can actually find my circumference. And when I do some math, I get a number of 21.98. So what I basically found is I found the length of this piece. So this piece here is 21.98 centimeters. Well, now I can actually find my area for my length times width because I know my length times width. I know this is 13 centimeters, and I know I'm timesing that by 21.98. And I get a bigger number, obviously, 285.74. And again, that's area. Now I have the area for all of the 3 shapes that are making this prism up. So it's easy enough for me to turn around and look at this and say, well, to calculate surface area then, surface area is simply combining all of these areas. So I'm just going to get a different color so I can, well, maybe I'll, no, we'll get a different color. We'll go blue. Combining this area plus this area plus this area. That's all I'm doing. So I'm simply going to say, well, I'm going to add those pieces together. And when I add those pieces together, I should get 362.67 centimeters. Make that 6 a little bit better. And that's how I find surface area of a cylinder. I'm basically adding the pieces together. Just to give you guys a short track, a faster way to look at this, if some of you guys wanted to, you could simply say, well, what is surface area? Well, surface area involves you adding two circles. So sometimes what we'll do is we'll write a formula and we'll write 2 times pi r squared, because I have two areas for my circle. Plus I need to add together the area for my rectangle, which we've figured out is actually my circumference times my height in this case, or pi d times my height. Now, don't forget again that I could have called that height, that 13, could have been called a length. As we said back here at the very beginning, we said, well, that height could also be a length if I turn my cylinder sideways. So this is my height and this is my length. And they're basically the same thing. So this formula actually could be this height, could also be a length. And if I have that information, I can substitute all that information in, and I could solve this without doing all that extra work, without drawing that net. So as long as I can solve for my radius and I can solve for my distance or solve for my height, I can actually solve any one of those. And we'll go through a couple examples later on where I give you the surface area and I ask you to tell me the diameter of the circle, or I give you the surface area and I ask you to tell me the height of the prism. So there's lots of different things that I can ask you to find from here, but this general formula allows me to find surface area, and then allows me to use my algebra components, or you work backwards and take away my surface areas, the same way we did with the triangular prisms and the rectangular prisms. Hope this sort of makes sense. If I was summarizing steps, I know somebody had asked me to summarize steps. My steps generally are draw a net. That would be the first place I would start anytime I'm doing this kind of a question. Second step would be find the area of my circle. Third step would be find my circumference. Fourth step would be use my circumference as my width. And the last thing that I would do is I would add the areas all together. Okay, so quick summary. 1, draw a net. 2, 1, draw a net. 2, find the area of the circle. 3, find the circumference. 4, find the area of the rectangle. And 5, add all the pieces together. Add the pieces together. So yeah, take a second and look at the video again. Make sure you're understanding things. If you have any questions, by all means, you can ask. We'll keep you up to date, but hopefully that sort of made sense, and I'll give you some work to practice that. Thanks, guys.